Well, do you know, very many years ago, I won't say how long ago, but very many years ago, this is what struck me. I wanted to know what was real. I was raised in a home of Jewish heritage, but then my father forsook Judaism and moved into an arena of metaphysics. Some aspect of metaphysics struck me as having a great deal of truth in it. He was drummed out of the temple, so to speak. And I had a mother who was vehemently and violently opposed to metaphysics and didn't like it and thought it was terrible until one day the truth of it, the beauty of it, hit her. And so here I was raised then sort of in a metaphysical concept, but I could never believe it. So when I went off to college, I majored in religion. College didn't, this seemed to be a terrible mistake because I came out ridiculously confused, and so I took off. You know. And of course I came out ridiculously confused for an obvious reason. It served its purpose. It pointed out that really was not where it was at. So I took off. Well, World War II came along, and I was in it. Before the United States got into the war, I was in it. And, well, anyway, I made my way to the east by virtue of the fact that that's where I went. I went over into India, where I joined this group of troops known as Merrill's Marauders, that infamous group of Americans that went tearing into the jungle only to be decimated and absolutely torn apart. If any of you familiar with your history, I went into Burma with Merrill. I was only in there for the very shortest time, and I came out with all kinds of things. Dengue fever that nobody knew anything about yet. And I was moved back to a hospital, and at this time I was wondering, well, now, why doesn't my metaphysics, why doesn't my Christian Science do something about this situation? How was it? And, well, this was just a wonderment. Later I went on over into China. And I was a young officer, a junior officer, and it came time to find an interpreter. There was one old man as an interpreter, and nobody wanted him because we all realized that we needed this physical agility. We needed people that could get up and down these mountains with us if we were to survive in a combat situation. I was infantry, incidentally. And so, being the junior officer, I got stuck with the old man. But one thing I noticed about this old man was that he was a little cherub. Never has there ever been more the epitome of Buddha than this man. He had a face as light as light. He had a countenance of cheerfulness. He was pot-bellied, and he was jovial, and he was happy, and everything was a delight to him no matter what he saw. No matter how it appeared, he was a comforter to kids. He loved people no matter what they did. He was compassionate. No matter what the sin was that was committed anywhere, he could not see any sin there for some funny reason or another. And he couldn't see that anybody had really done anything wrong. He says if they've done something wrong, they'll find out. They'll be the very first one to find out, and they'll burn their fingers and find out the better way to do it. So he said, let them learn. If they don't learn now, they're going to have to learn some other time. But anyway, I noticed that everywhere he went, people were all gathered around him. And the last thing I wanted was a socialite for an interpreter. But I'm stuck with him. And I noticed that he was always a babble of words, but people would come away with great joy and enthusiasm, and kids would come away with happiness, and I just couldn't understand it. But I said, no, I'm going to lower the boom on that. I don't want anybody that's so happy. I want him to get out, and I put him on a program of physical training. I said, now look, let's you start doing a few push-ups, and let's you do a few knee bands, and let's strengthen your legs, because we got a lot of mountains that we're going to have to walk over, and if you're going to go with me, we're going to survive. So I put him on this thing of exercise. But then while this was going on, I found out, lo and behold, and incidentally, I'm new to the Orient. I had been in India, and incidentally had studied a little bit in India while I was there. Had the opportunity, that is, study religion. But then I'd gone into Burma in a combat situation, Now here I am in China, so I'm still really not acquainted with the Orient yet, and I couldn't believe some of the things that I saw, the cruelty that appeared to be present at every hand, and the grand disregard for the welfare of others. I just couldn't understand this. The starvation that was all over the darn place, and the dirt and the filth, all of these things I couldn't understand yet. But mostly I couldn't understand what seemed to be man's inhumanity to man at this point. Well, during this week, I find out that this man has just, I'm told, a week earlier, which would have been almost 2 weeks earlier, I guess, a little bit more than a week earlier, had just lost his wife and his daughter. And they had been raped to death before his eyes down in Hong Kong. Now, his wife he was not certain of his daughter, because her body had been thrown up on a great heap of bodies, and he really felt in his heart that she wasn't dead, that she was feigning death in order to get out of there, but he managed to escape. Well, this is the story I heard. Tremendous story, isn't it? And yet here I am looking at a man 10 days later, and he's the picture of joy, and he's got bright. I said one day blue eyes, and somebody says, how can you say an Oriental has blue eyes? Well, I don't know, but this man had blue eyes to me. That's all. Very bright, beautiful. And so I called him in as the arrogant intellectual, the arrogant American, the man who has to have everything make reasonable sense. It has to have reason and logic behind every move. And I called him in and I said, is it true that your wife, that you lost part of your family? And he said, yes. And I said, well, first of all, I'm sorry about it. I apologize. I grieve with you. But since we're going to live together, for gosh knows how long, I would like for you to tell me how, in God's name, a man can live so long with a woman and yet show no more respect for her than that. What kind of concept do you have for your woman? For someone that you love? What kind of love is it that would be so heartless? And I lowered the boom. I said one hell of a lot more than that to him. Pardon me, Frank. I said an awful lot more to him than that. But in effect, that's what I said. And his reply was, he says, well, as I understand it, you are a student of Western metaphysics. He said, I found a little about you too during this time. He says, as I understand it, you're a student of Western metaphysics. And I said, yes. And he says, well, then you, and he says, and you wouldn't consider yourself a religious man. A religious man. And I said, yeah, I think God is that there is some grand design that is considerably more than appears on the scene. And he looked at me, and so I'm not sure that I can get the words precisely right. He looked at me and he said, you then of all people should know that my actions now are not a disregard for life or a callousness about life, but rather my actions are a disregard for an illusion called death. And I'm living that disregard for it. I'm not professing it. I'm not theorizing about it. I'm living it. Of course, there are many stories told of what appears to be the fact that death is only an illusion. Many stories are told about it. It's said in many ways. Every culture, every religion, every philosophy has something to say about it. Well, either you believe it or you don't believe it. And here was a man I found that, well, he believes it. And so not only does he believe it, but he's going to live his belief. You know, there's a tremendous difference between intellectualizing and then doing that is knowing something and living what that knowing allows one to do. There is one thing to see that freedom is man's natural estate, and another thing to live it. Now, consequently, I have a great, great delight and regard for these young people, and now many, many older, who are coming to see that why should we profess perfection, freedom, and not living. And so, while we may not approve of the way some of them are living it, at least we see that it's a step. And on the human scene, as it's put, a journey of 10,000 miles starts with a single step. So these kids are living a sense of freedom in many ways. They're coming out from under what appears to be the binds and the restraints and restrictions of rules and regulations that have not really performed, have not done what they had promised to do. 2,000 years ago, Christianity said, "Come unto me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest." Well, how much rest do you see among all of the Christians as they... I'm not pointing fingers now. I'm just across the board looking at all of the religions of the world. Please understand that this awareness right here, right now, includes all of the religions of the world, all of the philosophies, all of the conceptions. So when I talk about one, I'm only talking about an aspect of the self. I'm not lowering the boom on anybody. But if you look out and see how much rest do you really see among all of the church-going people? How much rest? Now, true, there's a lot of comfort there. There's a lot of beauty there. But when has the so-called institution produced has it accomplished its so-called mission? You know, if instead of peace they were selling soap, bars of soap, and the industry had been about the business for 2,000 years trying to sell these bars of soap and sold so few, 1 in 1,000, 2 in 10,000 actually finally buy the bar of soap and see it and feel it and make use of it, what would have happened to the industry? It would have folded long ago, because somebody would have said, "Gee whiz, something is amiss, something is wrong." And look at Judaism. 5,000 years ago, it began with the statement, "Thou shalt have no other God before me." And for 5,000 years, it's been working on the sale of the Ten Commandments. And if you just look around, just to look at the tangible scene, how many do you see practicing the Ten Commandments? So therefore it has failed to sell its product. Well, all of these things were the things that I pondered and wondered about and traveled all around the world looking for to get the answers. And I understand now why this traveling is going on. And I think it's great. I resolved that if this man could have looked in the face of such a tragedy and could in 10 days or thereabouts be filled with glee and delight and still have people flocking around and feeling the joy that he was, the peace he was, well, I thought, well, now here's a man that's got something to say to me, and I'll learn in secret. Well, he was my interpreter for a long time. And I went back, when the war was over, I went back to China to study with him. All in all, I lived with him for a little more than 3 years. He was, by terminology, he was a Taoist, but I've studied with many, so don't think that this is the only instruction. But he was a Taoist, withdrawn from what appeared to be the organizational aspect of it, because he said, "Gee whiz, you can't take truth and strain it through a sieve. After all, the sun seems to shine on all kinds of trees, shines on the ones that are not necessarily straight, but the ones that are bent over too. And it seems to shine on the ones that are small as well as the ones that are big. And I can't, he said, believe that just because, unless one is a Taoist, that he will never find nirvana or perfection or peace. And then I began, again, a very serious study of Western metaphysics. As I came back, I saw that the thing that seemed to me to most nearly point out all that I had learned during this period of time was Christian Science, because at least here was a philosophy that did not try to make a great big man on a white throne somewhere. It said that God was an immutable principle that was ever present. It was spirit, it was love, it was life, life itself, truth. And this seemed to me to be infinitely better than anything that I could find on the scene where I was. I was still a soldier. All right, now if I'm talking too much about Bill, from this point on, if you will, every time I say I, and speak of an I experience, please put yourself there in lieu of it. Because I tell you a very simple truth, that what you hear right now is yourself. What you see is yourself. The one out there is yourself. Even though we label it, name it, even the government we see that we want to improve, even the world that we see that we would want to improve is I, identity. It's included here as I. Now, if all of you will just take just a second, and take a big old deep breath and relax and come down from this heavy hanging on my words, because the words got nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. Okay? Just relax, please, and sit easy. Because I'll tell you something now that is the point that the young kids seem to have seen in many respects. Especially those that want to include truth in their search. They want to not exclude an overriding, underwriting, eternal principle as being somewhere included in the scene. They seem to see it. And they see it more quickly than the older people do, simply because it hasn't been covered over with this grand veneer of trying to make a living and contend and battle our way through a thicket. Now listen gently. Let me show you why the world is really who and what you are and not separate and apart from it. Right now, what is it that hears these sounds? What hears these sounds? What hears these sounds? What? What, in all honesty, right now, what hears these sounds? What sees the one called Bill up here leaning against a beautiful piece of furniture? Yeah. What sees these sounds? What hears these sounds? Obviously. I was given 28 days to answer this question in the old Taoist tradition. Question is asked, you spend 28 days in study and contemplation and wandering around from pillar to post. The metaphysician just reads a book, boy, reads it, puts that one down, reads another one. Somebody told me about a fellow who for 2 years, every day read another book. One book a day for 2 years in order to read all the truth there was. It's better to read one book 100 times than it is to read 100 books once, in my opinion. But right now, what hears these sounds? The laughter of children in the distance and the sound of dogs barking. All right, what hears these sounds? What sees these sights if it isn't simple consciousness or life itself? Life itself. life itself, or consciousness, or as I was looking for a new word to use, I said awareness. One that had not been used so often and hadn't become so trite and so stuck and nailed down by the sundry establishments and institutions and philosophies and religions. I use the term awareness. But what is it if it isn't awareness right now that is being awake? Awareness right now listens and hears Bill. Awareness right now thinks. Awareness right now feels feelings. Isn't it? What is it? What is it that if you were to stick a pin, in your finger, what would feel the pain? What would feel the sharp prick? What would see the sight of blood? Awareness. Awareness. If you were to, right now it includes a very beautiful room, a very lovely home. What sees the beautiful room and feels the feeling in it? It's awareness doing it. Where is the image, the form, the shape, or whatever you call it, or the piece of furniture called piano? It's within awareness. Within it. It is seen within awareness. What you really see here are a lot of qualities and attributes, nothing but qualities and attributes that you name, have labeled piano. For example, you see shape or form, but there's no piano in that shape or form. There's that shape that you see, form that you see, but there's no piano itself in that form. You see color, but there's no piano itself in the thing called color. Color is a quality or an attribute. Form is a quality or an attribute. Right? You hear sounds, and sounds are wavelengths, vibrations, but where are they perceived? Within awareness itself, right? These qualities and attributes are seen and perceived within awareness itself. You see green leaf here. If you were to feel it and touch it, you would feel texture. You would feel, say, smooth. But there's no leaf itself in smooth. There's no leaf itself in softness. And so if you'll just stop and think, every form that's ever perceived is just a whole bunch of qualities and attributes. One of them is color. One of them is malleability, perhaps, or tensile strength, but all of these things are just qualities and attributes, but there is no isness itself in any of those qualities or attributes. And yet we will look out at a certain form and we then give it a big name, like piano, or man, or woman, or blanket, or bird, or world, or government. And yet where is everything seen? Every one of those qualities or attributes. Where is it ever seen? Where is the only place it's ever seen? Within. This awareness. It's aware right here, right now. This awareness. It's aware right here, right now. Where have you ever seen the one called husband, daughter, friend, school, government? Where have you ever seen it? Within this awareness. Not another. Within this one. This awareness. Now, yeah, we can say, yeah, but my wife, boy, she's got her own ideas. Yeah, but where do you see the wife? And where do you see what appear to be other ideas that she's got? Within this awareness. And you can say, yeah, but I got a history professor that is hellfire. He wants me to memorize everything in the cotton-picking book as if memorizing all of that stuff is supposed to mean something to me. But where do you see the one called history professor? Where do you hear the words? Where do you see the book? Where do you do the so-called memorizing? Where do you read the words? Where do you feel the pages of the book, if not within this awareness that's aware right here, right here? This awareness. Not somebody else's awareness. Your own awareness. The awareness that one says is I. You stop and think about history. Go back to the the pre-words, the era before words, which must have been the greatest era of all. Oh, boy. There isn't a single pebble or rock that you can't pick up right now that didn't exist, or a grain of sand, or a drop of water that didn't exist before the first word ever came into being. Where do you see it if you go back into history? Where do we think of the great movements that came along? Where? But within this awareness right here. Where have we ever heard of the invention of the weed except within this awareness right here? This awareness, not another. Where has all of the study of history and past movements and events, where has it taken place? Within this awareness right here. Not another, not somebody else. And if you were to start naming the figures of history and how great they were and what they did and didn't do, what Abraham Lincoln meant to this country, what Karl Marx has done with his philosophy, what seems to be going on in the Vatican or in Boston, where have you ever seen or heard or felt or known about any of those concepts? Always within this one. Never have we ever been concerned with another single awareness. This one. Here is us. Now, it's true, we look out at the images out there and we get all wrapped up in them and what they're doing or not doing, what they're feeling or not feeling, the way they're acting or not acting, what we would like to have them do or not do. But all the while, we're still looking out at an aspect of the self we are. Here's I. Isn't this true? What is awareness if it isn't life itself? What is awareness? I mean, when we say we are alive, what do we mean? We mean I am awake. Awareness right here, right now, is the first indisputable and only unarguable point that you can say. There is no question but what awareness is aware right here, right now. Looking out at an aspect of itself that it sees as forms and images with a name, a label hung on it, called Bill, making sounds, but you're listening to your own sound. That is, if you identify as awareness, you're listening to your own sound. If you identify as a life, awareness, you're looking at your own sound. If you identify as awareness, you're feeling your own feeling. You're not capable of absorbing the so-called feelings of another. You realize what a ridiculous concept that was. Where did that ever come from? That I can. Also, if you identify as awareness, you can see suddenly that the authority lies here as awareness, and not out there with the image that's in it. The authority lies with the awareness that sees the form, and it doesn't lie out there with the image that appears to be trying to lower the boom, or with the dollar bill that appears to, just a piece of paper, with a number on it. Or most often, this thing that the financial, the lifeblood of this thing out that we see within awareness, called the financial institution. This thing called the financial institution, where has it ever been perceived except within awareness? And all that constitutes its lifeblood, called gold or money, where has it been conceived or seen or known or understood except within this awareness right here? Now the question is very simple. Where does the authority lie? With awareness or with the image that's within? It is as if suddenly, and this is the great religious experience that follows me around. It is who and what I am. It is man's great and sudden new discovery of an identity that he is that is infinitely greater than a bunch of fingers and toes and pumps and brain cells and lobes and hair and water and all of that. An identity infinitely greater than that. It's the discovery of an infinite identity that is already pure and perfect, on the scene, about the business of discovering itself. Now, I have no other story to tell except to point out that awareness itself is the identity one. And that if we would get to the root of what seem to be our trials and tribulations, our lack of dollars, our lack of security, our lack of a government that should be what it is, our lack of education as it should be, or whatever the appearance, if we would get to the root of it, we'd come home and discover identity. Here is I first, where dominion is. And we see that we get the beam out of this eye before we worry about the mote out there. We realize suddenly that heretofore we have identified as an image on a television picture tube, so to speak. And on this television picture tube there are many images, some of them called churches, some of them called schools, some of them called dollars, some of them called husbands, wives, some of them called a billion different things. We've identified as one of those images on there by the name of Bill, or by the name of John or Mary. And we did all of this for a reason. I won't go into all of that. There's a reason for it. But all of a sudden, we discover that awareness is infinitely more than that. That identity is infinitely more than just that little speck in time and space. But awareness is the picture too. Because isn't this awareness right here, right now, who and what I am? Is not this awareness right here, right now, is it not all-inclusive? Have you ever been outside it? Have you ever seen anything but this awareness? Have you ever heard a sound but this awareness? Have you ever heard of anybody in all history? Have you ever seen a star anywhere within the immensity of the universe that wasn't perceived within this awareness? Has there ever been a thought that was not this awareness? Suddenly we see that identity is this awareness, which is the whole picture to it. And we cease identifying as that poor, miserable little speck in space, beset by trials and tribulations and the weight of the world on its shoulder, trying to correct everything that comes along, trying to make over a universe, as LaoTse put it. The world is a perfect vessel, and we will try to improve it, spoil it. As Jesus put it, perfection is even now spread over the whole face of the earth, but men see it not. So identity shifts, and this can happen right here, right now, because it's already happened right here. Suddenly, we see that identity is this infinite perception that's going on. Perception is who and what I am. Vision is who and what I am. Awareness is who and what I am. Within which all things appear, and I am the appearing of all things. To use the analogy of the television set, instead of being that little image that has to contend with other images wherein time and space are involved, we see a greater identity, which is the whole picture too. And awareness is in it. It's boundless, it's endless, it has no beginning, it will have no end. Now that doesn't do away with this body. There still seems to be a body that you put clothes on. You still brush your teeth, and you still comb your hair, and that body does all kinds of little things, and you still are not unaware of a body. Awareness includes that too, but it then sees all bodies as itself. Lo and behold, we look out and suddenly we see that, gee whiz, if awareness is who I am, then everybody and everything I see is what I am. But the authority lies here's on, not out there as that. Not out there as that dollar bill, or out there as that institution, or out there as anything else. The authority is here's on, as it was put by Moses. And I suppose today should be the appropriate day to say it. And God gave man dominion over every creeping thing that creepeth upon it. And behold, everything was good. Now, our temptation, once this point has been seen, it's to keep falling back into the little limited, narrow sense of self and continue and to go on contending with the sights and the sounds out there. To fall back into the belief that we are just a speck in space and that they can lead us around by the nose and tell us to do this and that and the other thing. But the remarkable thing is that we find out that if when we live as awareness itself and test this now awareness, you'll find out that the dominion really is here. And if that much that appears to be the authority out there is really just a paper tiger, unfortunately to use that expression. I suppose it's unfortunate that I should use such an expression. But it really is. The body that appears to be malfunctioning. Why? So a body is malfunctioning. So what? Awareness isn't malfunctioning. Suddenly it's as if we were, instead of identified as a leaf on a tree, we identify as the whole tree, and all the leaves are whom what we are. Suddenly we look out and we see that all people are our brothers, to put it that way. And that to criticize and condemn or lower the boom on anyone out there, to call them good or bad, is to only lower the boom and condemn some aspect of the self I am. To say that somebody out there is guilty is to call myself guilty. To say that somebody out there is destroying something is to say I'm destroying. And I know full well that awareness is not about the goodness of doing itself in.